Hey y'all, good morning, Revolution. It's Brooklyn here, hosting for my first time, so please bear with me. I'm a little bit nervous, but we're gonna get through this. I'm here with some other comrades. We have Aaron in DC, Cesar in Philadelphia, and Waleed in Connecticut. And today we're going to be talking about this Young Republicans group chat. We've got a lot of young communists here, and we're going to give our perspective on the situation. So this week, the group chat was released by an investigation from Politico, filled with young Republicans. The chat had thousands of messages which contained racial and homophobic slurs, violent misogynistic comments, anti-Semitism, and talks of bringing back gas chambers. Let's not forget the "I love Hitler" comment. Um, the article has made mainstream headlines in the past couple days. JD Vance has commented on the matter, kind of downplaying it, saying, "Kids do stupid things, especially young boys," even though the chat was made up of adults aged 18 to 40 years old. The Young Republican National Federation called for the resignations of some of the leaders in the chat, and Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson has condemned the leaders in the chat, making comments saying that obviously this is not the principles of the Republican Party, but I would say that it's not so obvious considering that a lot of the values that the Republican Party has put forward in a number of its policies and rhetoric, attacking Black people, immigrants, women, the LGBT community, I could go on. But this just kind of seems like the inevitable result of the far right's attack on woke culture and why we make such a big deal out of it. The culture war is setting the groundwork for a new kind of common sense of what should be acceptable in our society. And I don't know about y'all, but I feel like we got to start making Nazis and white supremacists a little bit more uncomfortable. So, my first question is for you, Aaron. Were you surprised when you heard about this? Part of me wants to say that I was shocked because it's a lot of really gross stuff. But if I'm being honest, I wasn't very surprised at all. Is this who they've been telling us who they are all along, or does this really go against Republican values, as a few Republican representatives like House Speaker Mike Johnson have vocalized?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Brooklyn. I think this is not an isolated incident. I think we can look at things like Charlottesville, we can look at the January 6th insurrection, we can look at far right hate groups like Moms for Liberty. There's this very clear through line that the right wing is cultivating a generation trained to hate and obey. And so I really don't believe that these young Republicans making racist jokes, making misogynistic jokes, are sort of these like fringe forces. I think they are very much the pipeline of the Republican Party. These are people who staff campaigns, they hold local office, and they will run the GOP tomorrow. So, there are definitely some Republicans like Mike Johnson who, would really like to present their party as being pro family, but these people are quietly grooming young people into an ideology of racism, bigotry, and open terroristic violence. So I really do not believe that this is an isolated incident. And I think this is very much the natural byproduct of everything that the GOP has been working towards.
Totally. I mean, wasn't it only a couple weeks ago that President Trump was posting that crazy racist AI generated video? And it's like they think that they're allowed to do that. What do they think everybody else in their party and everybody else who's following them is doing? Waleed, let's go to you. I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about this free speech element. Since the beginning of the year, the Trump administration has threatened political opponents and critics with lawsuits and prison time. They've been trying to silence any criticism in news outlets and late night shows. They've been attacking the rights of protesters who are fighting against ICE, who are fighting for a free Palestine. But at the same time, we always hear the far right complaining about their First Amendment rights being taken away by woke cancel culture. They think it's cancel culture when police are held accountable for racism, or even during the Me Too movement when people were trying to be held accountable for being rapists or abusers. Why does it seem like the far right is always contradicting themselves when it comes to free speech? One second, they're trying to get people fired for calling Charlie Kirk a racist after his death, and the next minute, they're scolding us for trying to ruin the lives of young people who are going through Nazi phases. I mean, even yesterday, Ted Cruz was losing his mind that the party is going to be out on the streets this Saturday for the No Kings protests. What do you think they're so scared of?
Yeah, I think you see this double standard all the time, right? And even when what is it with Charlie Kirk, we saw, he had so many things that he said that were horribly racist, misogynistic, and we're supposed to pretend that he didn't say those things. Um, that kind of speech is so normalized, that we're supposed to pretend that's just normal, regular political speech, and saying that Israel is committing a genocide is hate speech and anti-Semitism, or saying that racism exists, or talking about slavery in the United States is, for example, hate speech. And it was funny how Trump kind of contradicted Charlie Kirk on that, because I think someone said, um, I think it was Pam Bondi or Trump said they were going to go after hate speech, and the interviewer asked him, "Well, Charlie Kirk said hate speech doesn't exist," and Trump says, "Well, he disagree with that right now." And I thought that was a funny moment that kind of highlighted the hypocrisy and the double standard that exists. And I think the reason they're so afraid and they act so afraid and they use this as a cudgel is, free speech really means, they want to normalize hate speech. They want to normalize racism and misogyny and all of these things that we fight against. Um, and it's not, we shouldn't be afraid or ashamed of canceling people for these things. I don't know what that means. I don't know what it means to cancel someone, but it means a lot of different things. But we need to call it out, and we need to make a stand against um, racism and misogyny in all forms, not just against right wingers, but it can infiltrate anything. It can infiltrate our own spaces on the left and within the party, within any organization. So we should always be on the lookout for that. It's not acceptable in any form.
Absolutely. And I really, I kind of have a similar question or curiosity about what it actually means to cancel somebody, because I kind of think of it as just holding somebody accountable. It kind of in a similar situation, Cesar, in your state of Pennsylvania at Penn recently, students were caught on video making racist remarks and racial slurs. The university's code of conduct says that although it condemns hate speech, that student speech is not grounds for disciplinary action. But should it be? What do we do about hate speech, not just on campuses, but I mean out in the world generally? Should it be outlawed, or is it a matter of education? Is it a mixture of both? I think about this a lot in regards to extremist groups like the KKK. Like, sure, we live in America and everybody has all these different opinions, but when your opinions are hateful and bigoted, when they contribute to the oppression and violence towards marginalized groups, there's got to be a line drawn somewhere. I mean, in some places like Europe, Nazi speech is outlawed. What do you think?
I mean, I agree with a lot of what you said. I think, like, just to talk about the instance that you mentioned. So, the student goes viral, like, posts on Snapchat. He's just saying like a ton of like racial slurs over and over again, so it'll be like the N word. And you have groups on campus like Umoja and descendants of Afro Americans at Penn that are trying to like, they're advocating for some sort of disciplinary action or something to happen to these individuals that were caught on camera like saying these terrible things. And I mean, from their perspective, how can one go to a school and like try to feel safe or work on like your studies or try to like, just feel like you're a part of a student community at all or feel in any kind of way advocated or protected, when the school can't discipline and refuses to discipline students that say these really violent things. And I think like a really key thing here is that this is just not speech, right? Like hate speech is, it's a good way to like identify it, but its consequences are a lot worse than just that. Like you individually, you feel threatened. It's violent to have some people say those sort of things or express those sort of opinions. I mean, you talk about like the KKK or like neo-Nazis. Those are people that straight up advocate for like the eradication of whole groups of people based off of color, like the color of their skin. Like that's just not speech in any like it's just not just simply normal speech in any other context. So to say that certain things like hate speech shouldn't have any consequences because of the form that it takes, which is saying something or saying issuing a statement, to me just seems incredibly nonsensical. And it's just indicative of a society that has certain priorities over others, mainly that marginalized groups don't have a right to feel safe, to feel protected, that those sort of like that sort of environment where somebody can feel so attacked and marginalized is acceptable as long as you're protecting the right of certain individuals to just say these horrible things.
Totally. It's kind of like that idea, like you're allowed to believe what you believe, but as long as you're not taking away my rights. Like that's kind of where I draw the line at least. You know what I mean? You can believe whatever you want, but if you start stepping on my toes, then that's not okay.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Aaron, JD Vance's particular comment, boys will be boys kind of comment stuck out to me because we know that there's this kind of connection between white supremacy and male supremacy. And a lot of young conservative men are being driven to the manosphere where they place a lot of their anger and frustration with the world and blame it on women and other minorities. Du Bois once said in a speech to the Southern Negro Youth Congress that white youth are frustrated. Is that what's going on today, given that there's a lot of financial problems that we're all facing, regardless of race or gender? A lot of young people don't see a future for themselves. And if that is the case, that white people or young men are frustrated, then what's up with the particular way that they're expressing their frustration? I mean, for example, a lot of women are frustrated about our situation, about a lot of the same stuff, about loneliness, about job troubles. Yeah, you don't see a lot of us committing a lot of these mass shootings or mass murders. As the far right likes to deny, we know that a lot of mass shooters and school shooters often come from these conservative pipelines and are driven by far right ideology. What do you think that we should do as communists to kind of address this frustration and this crisis of violence in the far right?
That's a really good question, Brooklyn. And, I think the first part of your question is maybe what I'll focus on first, because I think your point about how there's kind of like frustration amongst a lot of like young white men, I think it's really true. I think there is a lot of frustration amongst young white men. And I think one of the reasons why the far right in this country has been so successful in capitalizing off of that frustration and really pushing this kind of like grievance driven politic is because they understand how to play politics, quite honestly. I think politics is really about self interest. And these people are acting as if they are fighting in the self interest of these young white men. And that's something I think we really have to reckon with. Why are there a lot of young working class white men who are increasingly aligning themselves with these forces? I think that really goes to show, right, the sort of power that conservative forces, corporate forces have managed to sort of accumulate for themselves. They've built an entire infrastructure so that they can really use these racist and sexist ideologies to sort of energize their base. And so I think, to sort of answer the second part of your question, how can we as communists really do something about this? I think we really got to start to push an alternative version of what it means to be a man. I think that's part of the reason why a lot of these young men are being driven to the Republican Party. It's because they're presenting themselves as if they're pro family. They're saying that they are going to sort of fight for the quote unquote like working men, despite obviously, right, being funded by these corporate forces who want to destroy our labor movement. And so I think we really got to push an alternative version of masculinity and really tell people that if you want to be a man, then you got to serve. And if you want to be a leader, you got to make yourself of service to others, because that's what it really means to be a real leader. And I think there's also something there too, sort of about the need to fight for more job programs, the need to fight for more apprenticeship programs, and really making a more concentrated effort to get more young men in the labor movement, because I really believe that it's in the union that these people will sort of learn how to struggle for unity and ultimately encounter more progressive ideas.
Absolutely. I mean, just being around different kinds of people than you, but working with other people who are different than you, that's one of the greatest things that I felt working in the party, working with people who come from all different walks of life, getting to learn things that maybe I haven't experienced myself. That's the greatest way, I feel like, to develop understanding, empathy, and solidarity, kind of like what you were saying, Aaron. Waleed, There's also this kind of propaganda and technology element where algorithms are kind of driving people into these hateful rabbit holes that and are kind of promoting hateful speech. I recently read an article where researchers had discovered that there's been a fourfold increase in misogynistic content being thrown on young men's FYP pages. I'm thinking about some of these young boys who are in middle school and high school who are vulnerable and who are being preyed on by money hungry algorithms. Or even I think about Twitter and how people are allowed to say some of the most crazy stuff on there and it will be promoted to the top of your page. Um, because it seems like people and companies are able to make money off of the amount of engagement that they get online, and they don't seem to care that it's causing real world violence. Specifically talking about the AI issue, the technology issue, a lot of young people are on social media and don't really necessarily want to be censored. How do you think we should address this? It's a big question. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah, it's no, it's a really uh, accurate description because I was teaching at this middle school, seventh grade, eighth grade science class, and my first day, my nickname immediately, these were these 13, 14-year-old boys, um, and my nickname the first day was Andrew Tate, and I'm like, how do you even know who Andrew Tate is? But they're constantly on their phones even during school, and these young boys are watching, and if I I was telling them about how Andrew Tate is not such a great person, and they're like, where's your Bugatti? So they're being pushed this kind of really right wing, egotistical, individualistic culture, and it is a real problem. And I think we've seen with neoliberal, the neoliberal consensus or the neoliberal movement that um, capitalism will ally with the far right, with right wing Christians, with white nationalists, because that can be that can be a source of profits, that can be a source of economic growth in the neoliberal model. So we have to tackle this holistically. We have to be fighting against racism, but also tie it in with the fight against the big corporations, monopoly capital, um, and the neoliberal economic consensus. And to go back to the previous question about, are white men frustrated? I think clearly there is this frustration that um, these big tech companies are capitalizing on, but we also can't reduce racism down to, oh, things are economically bad,
Mm,
so it's giving rise to this racism. But rather, the reality is that racism exists and white supremacy exists. We live in a structurally racist society, and this is one of the way that it manifests. This is one of the way that it comes out, and it's being used in times of crises to further entrench that system. So we have to be, you know, any fight against big tech, and it's an interesting question about censorship as well, because where do you draw the line? I think we've seen in China they've introduced laws about um, how much time students can spend or children can spend online on these social media platforms. I think we need to push for real regulation against these companies to rein them in and make sure that we're not, exposing our children to these not just these ideas, but just social media and TikTok and all of these websites in general that can be so addictive and so toxic in so many ways. So yeah.
mm. Totally. I really agree with you on the regulation point there. I think that definitely here we could have more regulation on kind of generally what we've been talking about hate speech. And also, I think it's really important what you mentioned about this isn't just an economic problem. And I think, sometimes even on the left, people kind of fall into that thinking where they think that racism or misogyny can simply be solved by fixing the economy, and that's not going to fix everything. And I think you said
Can I
that
say
really well.
something? Because
Yeah.
some of the, I don't know, I seem to attract these white men who think I'm an ally and tell me all about their racist thoughts. But I've met a few
Gosh.
people, and even the most privileged, the most well-off people, they tend to be the most paranoid and the most racist. Like they tend to be, and it seems like it's not so much that, oh, I'm struggling, because if racism didn't exist, we'd be all in this together. But but it's not that they're struggling, it's that they see you know they see wokeism or this fight against racism as a threat to their own personal privilege and their own personal economic standing. I think um, that's how I see it. At
Mm,
least that's part of it.
yeah, you could say that. You could say that last part again. Um, Cesar, I don't know how much you're tuned in to what's happening on the far right in the Groyper scene. I honestly know a very limited amount about it, but generally to me it seems like it's a part of a culture that's filled with this kind of edgelord humor that tries to be funny or relatable through being offensive. I always thought it was lazy humor to punch down, but it seems like it's kind of working. I mean, young conservatives seem to be happy that they've found a place that they can fully express their most offensive thoughts without criticism. We've kind of heard a little bit of this talk with companies reducing their DEI policies and white people feeling more comfortable around the office. You know, they're not going to have HR called on them all of the time. But more than that, it seems like in some places, like even the presidency, that you can be rewarded for being a bigot. So, what is the case for being young and woke? I mean, why should we as young people care about what we say, about what we do? And are offensive jokes and comments really that deep?
I Number one, like the whole Groyper scene, whatever those like weird people just call themselves, like it's just to me, this is not like super like analytical, but just so cringy. Like at a
Yeah.
base level, I don't know why it's uncreative. Like you said, it's punching down. It's tried out. It's just super lame, and it's really in a sense like kind of like the chickens coming home to roost, because we have this society that's really has this heavily enforced hierarchy, the social hierarchy, where white men are at the top. And that's been the case for centuries since the foundation of this country, right? So now you have these progressive movements where you have marginalized communities that are making advancements socially and culturally. You have women that are making advancements socially and culturally. And these young men, or like these men in general, just view that as like, wow, this is kind of like all this sort of entitled privilege and status that I thought that was just my birthright in a way. It's being taken away and it's being chipped away. Like I don't want to like lose that. So a lot of them end up going to like these sort of Groyper scenes because that's their way of kind of reclaiming that. I guess I don't really know. Um, but it's just so boring. Like if you look at I don't know what culture is there behind that? What sort of art is there behind that? What sort of I don't know. It's nothing. It's just people being edgy and mean for no reason and offensive for no reason.
Mm,
I think if we were to try to make a case for like being woke, it's that intersectionally is unironically a lot more fulfilling.
mm,
I love being able to engage with other cultures, with other people, with other sort of like I don't know different perspectives, different backgrounds. It's like fuck it. Like we had Kendrick Lamar Super Bowl halftime show last year. We're now gonna have Bad Bunny this year. It's gonna be really good. The music's gonna be great. Like that's good. And you see a lot of Americans celebrating that. They're like, wow, this is gonna be such a banger, like a halftime show. I always find much more fulfillment socially and in my life when I'm around spaces where people aren't like all like me, where I'm around people that are different than me, that have different backgrounds and perspectives than me. That sort of community is something that I think our culture kind of wants to naturally draw itself to. And that's what we've been seeing, like certain progressive advancements, like in the past few years. And I think just by engaging with that culture, like pretty seriously and unabashedly, like very being happy about the fact, like I don't know, very worried about the fact, like oh, intersectionality is good, being woke is like good or whatever. I think that is a positive thing, and I have no have no idea how people can see that and not see it as like a beautiful thing that it is. It's to me like beyond the pale.
Totally. I mean, I think the far right kind of does a disservice to its entire base because it instills these fears in people that make them scared of anything different, of anybody different. And like you were saying, it's so fulfilling being a part of a diverse community, of having new life experiences, of not being kind of isolated into a little bubble. And people's quality of life or their general happiness in their life is diminished when they're denied these new experiences.
Mm-hmm. 100%.
To kind of Oh yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing with you, like 100%. Like I would hate to be isolated and stuck in like a bubble. Like, boo, that sucks. No, I don't like that. I don't think most people do
Exactly.
either, honestly.
Um, so my last question I'm going to ask for everybody. So here we go. With something like these chats, it's clear that it's more than just a slip of words or an honest mistake. And I personally don't think that going through a Nazi phase is something that most people can relate to. But there are a lot of people out there, a lot of people in the working class who have said something once maybe they shouldn't have or have learned from past mistakes. And some of these people in our class think that cancel culture has gone too far too. So they feel like they're maybe walking on eggshells sometimes, or maybe that there's this unattainable expectation for them to be politically correct all the time. But for me, being woke is not about being perfect, it's about respect. And we can't build honest solidarity with each other if we don't respect each other. For me, that means respecting people's pronouns, saying people's names correctly. I mean, we see a lot of this in today's political climate. We saw it in Kamala's campaign where people were either ignorantly or purposefully mispronouncing her name. And we're seeing that again with Zoran's name. And I think some people might think that this is kind of an irrelevant issue, that it doesn't matter that much. But for me, as a Marxist, I can never stop thinking about history. And what I know is that something as seemingly as simple as a name holds so much of our identity and our humanity. And there was a time in this country where Black people weren't given names. There was a time where their names were stolen or replaced with slaveholder names. There is still a time where people make fun of Black people's names or brown people's names, where teachers don't take the time to learn how to pronounce their Black students' names. And so I would say that it does matter. One of our great working class heroes, Muhammad Ali, made it a political point to make sure that people said his name correctly after he changed it. And he was willing to fight over his name because he knew what it meant when someone ignored it. They were ignoring not just him, but his personhood. And I think that we should be willing to fight for these things too. Words are not just words, as we've been kind of hammering in here. They have a lot of power. And so, my last question for everybody is that criticism is a big part of the Marxist tradition. But how do we balance being strong critical thinkers and holding people accountable while at the same time being aware that working class people aren't always going to be perfect all the time? Aaron, we could start with you.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Brooklyn. I think the way that I've sort of been thinking about the place of criticism is like, there's constructive criticism and there's like destructive criticism. There's criticism that is constructive in the sense that it's trying to foster unity. You're pointing out obstacles to unity so that we can all come together, deal with these things that are holding us back, and move forward together. And then there's destructive criticism, right? Which is overwhelmingly negative. It offers no positive alternatives, and it is just about tearing each other down when that's exactly what the ruling class wants. And so I think that's sort of what I would offer as a way to kind of like balance the sort of Marxist tradition of criticism with the very, very real, right, Marxist tradition of working class unity. We got to have constructive criticism, and we got to understand when we are slipping into that deconstructive criticism that only destroys the unity that we really need if we want to overcome fascism.
Hmm. Waleed?
Yeah, I think criticism is, I don't know if I think as we said earlier, we have to take a stand against racism and misogyny and all different forms of bigotry. But I think it can always be done in a way like you said, it can be done with respect. It can be done with an understanding that people aren't going to be perfect. Um, and as I'm raising my toddler, I understand that she's gonna make mistakes. She might go through a Nazi phase. I don't know, but um, she she might. Um, so we have to be. I think we have to come from a place of love and understanding in everything we do. So, but I think we can do that um, without compromising our stand
Mhm.
against racism and other forms of bigotry. And I think we see this with the way we work with other groups as well in our popular front strategy and in our coalitions. We don't agree with everything they do, but that doesn't mean um, we compromise our principles. It doesn't mean that we compromise our positions. We may work with people strategically, but we know where we stand and what we're building towards. And if we want to be part of a movement, um, um, we it doesn't mean I'm not saying we work with we work with racists or we work with people like that, but um, we have to be sometimes strategically. I think we might need to work with people that we don't agree with, but we can have our own positions and stay firm on that. And people joining our organization or our unions need to be held to a certain standard. I think we can do
Mm.
that from a place of understanding.
Absolutely. I really like what you said about, remaining true to our standards, but, sometimes strategically or practically, we might have to work with people who might disagree with on things. Cesar, do you have anything?
Yeah, so oh my god, sorry, my throat. Okay, so when I was in middle school, so I went to a charter school in middle school, in Utah. So Utah, very white, very socially conservative, and I'm like the short brown kid. And this charter school didn't have like public lunches. You have to like pay for lunch. So my mom would like send me, to school with like leftovers, and I would have that for lunch. I'd heat it up in the microwave. Really good food. Peruvian food is like some of the best food in the world. To be honest, everyone should have it. But really good food. But it's different than what like I guess some of my classmates were used to, right? So every so often I would heat something up, and I'd enjoy it, and they'd be like, "What is that? Like, wait, what are you eating? That smells so weird and different." And it's just like, and kids can sometimes be cruel without knowing that they're being cruel. But like, it made me feel like a certain type of way. And I remember talking to mom about that, and she's like, "Well, they don't know what you're eating on their Like, they actually don't know what it is that you're, having for lunch, right? So maybe just try to say like in I don't know, like just be upfront and be like, look, this is like my food. This is what I enjoy. This is really good. I like it a lot, and it makes me feel a certain type of way when you approach it like you are doing. And so I
Mm.
did. And they took it really well because, like, again, they were classmates. They're not trying to be mean. They were just, and this is a problem with people in the working class. There is like a sort of ignorance because, again, we live in a society with these like very entrenched social hierarchies. So they weren't trying to be cruel. They were making me feel kind of unwelcome and a little bit like, different. But that was just them reacting or just, being a part of like being a product of the society they grew up in. And the moment I was like, this made me feel like, I felt a little bit hurt by your comments or remarks. They were like, oh, we didn't mean it that way. And also, I guess, like, sure, let me try some of your food. And it was really good. And they liked it a lot. And then I remember also, like, another day, this is much more recent, like, working on, like, a poll. I was talking to, like, a poll worker. And we are talking about, like, just social issues. And he's, like, this older black dude who lived in Philly his whole life. And I'm just there, helping like the poll, like come here as a city, like, in this city as like a college student, right? So that's where I'm coming from. And there is with us this other dude, this like white dude, and he's like union organizer, but he didn't grow up in Philly, so he also came to the city as like a transplant. And we're talking about these things, and he has, just because it's like the fact that he's older, right? He has certain like progressive views, but it's again a product of his time and a product of like how he grew up and whatnot, right? So I'm engaging with him respectfully about why I disagree and why I think I disagree with some of his perspectives and why I disagree. But the other guy was getting really heated and was like getting kind of like emotional with it, and at one point started being like, "Oh, you're just talking like a fascist," which is a crazy thing to say to like an older black man who's like growing up in Philly and like working at the polls for like the Democratic
Mm.
primary. It's just such an outrageous remark. And then he storms off and leaves. And the guy starts laughing and turns to me and he's like, see, this is why I can't take any of y'all talking about like young people seriously, because you guys all come from out of the city and try to tell us like what is what. And
Mm,
I think the what I'm trying to get to with like these two anecdotes is that number one, it matters a lot to just talk to people and be out in community, and that's what we should be doing as members of like as organizing members of communists and like the working class, right? Like we shouldn't be staying in our bubbles. We shouldn't just be staying in like left wing organizing spaces. We should be talking to folks and engaging them where they're at and meeting them from this kind of like perspective of like, yeah, you are imperfect and there are things that you probably hold that are different than my views, and sometimes you might even say some things that are like low key or maybe high key pretty offensive. But if I engage with you genuinely and try to like build some sort of like trusted community around with you, and as long as you're not like really openly bigoted and like racist, because I'm not going to work with people like that. But if I can like try to just have a relationship with you in some way as a neighbor, as maybe a friend, then when you have some of these ideas or some of these opinions that are maybe a little bit backwards, then we can talk about it, and people are more receptive to that. They're more receptive to those conversations if you come to them from like a moment, like a place of respect, and not just like a condescending or like Aaron said, like a really ungenerative sort of criticism. So I
mm.
think maybe the thing that's like really key is just having that relationship, those kind of relationships, and just being out there and being willing to engage with people that are maybe a little bit different than you.
Totally. I really appreciated both of those stories, but particularly the first story. I really related to that. I don't know if I'm just lucky or if I just happen to meet a lot of good working class people, but a lot of the people that I've talked to, either canvassing, just out on the street when we're tabling, they're very open. I'm proud to say that working class people are very open
Mm-hmm.
to learning. They want to learn. They want to make their conditions better, and if you can give them the tools and the ideas to make them actually change their life, they're going to be open to that, as long as like what we're saying here, that we're doing it in a respectful way, that we're not being on this moral high horse telling everybody else what to do.
Yeah.
um, I really love this conversation, guys. Thank you for being on here today with me. I just want to mention that Saturday, the CPUSA is going to be out for the No Kings protest. You may have seen Ted Cruz. We mentioned it a little bit before, but Ted Cruz was infuriated that we're going to be there. So if you want to make him a little bit more angry, go out and show out on Saturday. Um, yeah, a great conversation, guys. I will see y'all soon, and